It was supposed to be the perfect crime. A killer, cold and calculating, thought he had erased every trace of his wrongdoing. No fingerprints, no murder weapon, no digital footprint, just a clean, unsolvable case. The police had little to go on, and for a while, it seemed like the crime would fade into the growing pile of unsolved mysteries. But what the killer didn't realize was that sometimes the smallest details, the ones we overlook, can come back to haunt us. A single overlooked clue, hiding in plain sight, would unravel everything. The victim, a well-liked local entrepreneur named Daniel Brooks, had no known enemies. By all accounts, he was generous, successful, and well-connected in his community. His sudden disappearance sent shockwaves through his circle of friends and family. But when his body was discovered days later in an abandoned construction site, the horror truly set in. The crime scene was disturbingly meticulous, no signs of a struggle, no obvious cause of death at first glance, and worst of all, no physical evidence to point investigators in the right direction. It was as if the killer had wiped the slate clean. For weeks, detectives pored over every possible lead, chasing dead end after dead end. But then, a break in the case came from the most unexpected place, one the killer had never accounted for. It wasn't surveillance footage, a DNA match, or a witness coming forward that turned the tide. It was something much smaller, something that seemed insignificant at first glance. And yet, this tiny fragment of evidence would set off a chain reaction that led police straight to their suspect. As investigators began piecing things together, they realized just how carefully orchestrated this crime had been, and just how dangerously intelligent the killer truly was. But no matter how well a crime is planned, the truth has a way of surfacing. And in this case, the truth was hiding somewhere the killer never thought to check. Daniel Brooks had always been the kind of man people gravitated toward. Charismatic, ambitious, and endlessly driven, he had built a thriving business from the ground up, earning not only financial success, but also the admiration of those around him. But success often breeds resentment, and behind the smiles and handshakes, there were whispers, small, hushed conversations about deals gone wrong, bitter rivals, and perhaps even a few secrets he kept well hidden. To the outside world, he was a self-made entrepreneur with a bright future, but to those who knew him best, there were signs that something had changed in the weeks leading up to his death. Close friends recalled how Daniel had grown increasingly paranoid, double-checking locks, glancing over his shoulder, and cutting conversations short when certain topics came up. He had even mentioned hiring a private investigator, though no one knew exactly what or who he was looking into. Whatever it was, it had him on edge, as if he had uncovered something he wasn't supposed to. In the days following his disappearance, investigators combed through his personal and professional life, searching for any clue that could explain why he had been targeted. His business dealings were scrutinized, and while he had his fair share of competitors, nothing stood out as an obvious motive for murder. However, a closer look at his finances revealed something unusual: several large withdrawals made in cash over the course of a few weeks, each one just under the reporting threshold that would have required bank scrutiny. Had Daniel been paying someone off? Or was he preparing to run? Then there was his personal life. His relationship with his longtime girlfriend, Lisa Carter, had become strained, with rumors of heated arguments and late-night phone calls he refused to explain. Friends reported that he had grown distant, distracted, even evasive when asked about his sudden change in behavior. Some suspected infidelity, while others wondered if he had gotten himself involved with the wrong people. But without hard evidence, it was impossible to say for sure. The list of potential suspects grew longer with every passing day. There was the disgruntled former business partner, Mark Ellison, who had been forced out of their company months earlier and was still entangled in a bitter legal battle with Daniel. Then there was Jake Holloway, a loan officer with a reputation for dealing with people who operated outside the law, people who didn't take kindly to unpaid debts or broken promises. And of course, there was Lisa, the grieving girlfriend whose alibi had gaps that couldn't easily be explained. But just when police thought they were getting closer to an answer, something strange happened. The crime scene, which had once seemed devoid of any real evidence, suddenly revealed a crucial clue, one that changed everything. It was something small, something the killer had overlooked, and once detectives found it, the entire case took a shocking new turn. Just as investigators thought they had their breakthrough, the case took an unsettling turn. The crucial piece of evidence, a seemingly insignificant item found near the crime scene, was sent to the forensic lab for further analysis. But before results could be finalized, it vanished without a trace. No record of it being misplaced, no sign of an administrative error, just gone. Detectives were baffled. Had someone inside the department made a mistake, or had the killer somehow managed to infiltrate the very system meant to catch them? It was a disturbing possibility, one that made everyone involved question just how deep this crime truly went. If evidence could disappear that easily, then someone either on the inside or working very close to it wanted this case to stay cold. Then, out of nowhere, came the warning. A detective assigned to the case, Alex Monroe, found an anonymous note slipped under the windshield of his car. The message was simple, chilling in its directness: walk away, or you'll be next. No signature, no way to trace it, just a clear indication that someone was watching. The threat was enough to shake even the most hardened officers on the team, but Monroe wasn't ready to back down. Instead, he doubled his efforts, retracing Daniel Brooks' final days, looking for anyone that could explain why someone was willing to go this far to keep the truth buried. The more he dug, the stranger things became. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station, which could have placed a suspect near the scene, was mysteriously erased. A potential witness, an older woman who claimed to have seen something unusual the night of Daniel's disappearance, suddenly recanted her statement and refused to talk. One by one, the pieces that should have been coming together were being pulled apart. And then came the revelation no one expected. An old police report, buried deep in the archives, linked Daniel Brooks to a case from nearly a decade ago, a case that had long been forgotten. It was an investigation involving a group of close-knit friends, a financial dispute that turned ugly, and a betrayal that left one man ruined while the others walked away unscathed. Daniel's name was never listed as a suspect, but his connection to the individuals involved was undeniable. Had someone from his past finally come back for revenge? Or was he hiding a secret of his own, one that had finally caught up to him? As Monroe pushed forward, he realized he wasn't just chasing a killer, he was unraveling a hidden story, one that some people had gone to great lengths to keep buried. But just as he started putting the pieces together, something happened that changed everything, a shocking discovery that turned the entire case on its head. As Detective Monroe dug deeper into Daniel Brooks' past, the case took an even darker and more perplexing turn. Just as he was beginning to piece together a possible motive, another unexpected twist shattered everything he thought he knew. Late one evening, Lisa Carter, Daniel's girlfriend, received an anonymous package at her doorstep. No return address, no tracking information, just a plain brown envelope sealed with tape. Inside was a single photograph, old and faded, depicting a group of young men in their early 20s, all smiling, arms draped around one another as if frozen in a moment of youthful camaraderie. But one face stood out: Daniel. He looked younger, carefree, yet something about the image felt off. Scrawled in red ink across the bottom were 3 words that sent a chill down Lisa's spine. He deserved it. Panicked, Lisa rushed to the police station, the photo gripped tightly in her shaking hands. Monroe studied it carefully, his mind racing with possibilities. Who had sent this? And why now? What was it supposed to mean? The faces in the picture were unfamiliar, except for Daniel's, but the eerie message suggested that whoever was behind it knew something tied to whatever had gotten him killed. The fact that Lisa had been targeted next changed everything. Was she in danger? Or was she being used as a pawn in a much larger game? Just as Monroe prepared to run a background check on the individuals in the photo, another development threw the investigation into further chaos. A forensic technician working late at the crime lab made an alarming discovery: a piece of evidence that had supposedly gone missing had inexplicably reappeared. It had been placed back in the evidence room as if it had never been gone in the first place. There were no security breaches, no sign of forced entry, and the logbook showed no record of it being checked back in. It was as if someone had removed it just long enough to tamper with it, then quietly returned it without a trace. But why? And more importantly, what had changed? Monroe had it re-examined immediately, only to find something disturbing: it didn't match the initial forensic results. The item, which was supposed to be a key to cracking the case, now led them in an entirely different direction. Either there had been a mistake the first time, or someone was deliberately manipulating the investigation from the shadows. As Monroe pushed forward, the growing sense of unease became impossible to ignore. He was no longer just dealing with a murder. This was something much bigger. Every step forward was met with an equal and opposite force, pulling him back. Evidence vanished and reappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. And now Lisa was being drawn into the web of deception. But the most disturbing realization of all was that the killer wasn't just covering their tracks. They were still watching, still controlling the narrative, making sure that anyone who got too close to the truth wouldn't live long enough to uncover it. And just when Monroe thought things couldn't get any worse, another body was found, one that made it clear this case was far from over. Monroe had been a detective long enough to know when a case was slipping into dangerous territory. He had felt it before: the weight of unseen eyes, the sense that he was no longer just investigating a crime, but had become part of the story himself. But this time, it was different. The moment the second body was found, he knew this was no longer about Daniel Brooks alone. This was something deeper, more insidious, something that had been in motion long before he had ever started looking. The victim was a man in his late 40s, his body discovered in the back alley of a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. No ID, no phone, no immediate connection to the case, except for one chilling detail. Stuffed into the man's pocket was an envelope, identical to the one Lisa had received, containing the same faded photograph. And just like before, scrawled across the image in red ink was a message. But this time, it was different. This time, it read, "You're next." A deep, sinking dread settled in Monroe's gut as he stared at the words, the implications unraveling faster than he could process. Someone wasn't just sending a message, they were escalating. This wasn't about tying up loose ends. This was about control, fear, power, and whoever was behind it wanted him to know that he was in their sights. He tried to shake off the paranoia creeping into his mind, but it was impossible to ignore the growing list of unanswered questions. Who was the new victim? Had he been part of the same past Daniel Brooks had tried to bury? Was he the one who sent Lisa the envelope, only to be silenced before he could reveal the truth? The connections were hazy, but one thing was clear: this wasn't just about covering up a murder. Someone was playing a much bigger game, one where every step Monroe took was being carefully watched. The feeling of being followed started subtly at first. A car lingering too long in his rearview mirror, a shadow moving just out of sight when he turned a corner, the unsettling sensation of being observed even in the most mundane moments. At first, he told himself it was exhaustion, the natural paranoia that came with working a case that had already claimed multiple lives. But then, the incidents became harder to explain. His apartment door, which he always double-checked before leaving, was unlocked when he returned late one night. His desk at the station, normally untouched, had been rifled through, though nothing was missing. And then, the most disturbing of all, a voicemail left on his personal phone from an unknown number. It was only a few seconds long, but it was enough to send a cold shiver down his spine. A single steady breath, followed by a quiet whisper, "Stop looking." Monroe had dealt with threats before, but this was different. This wasn't some desperate criminal lashing out in fear of being caught. This was calculated, methodical. The kind of warning that didn't come from a lone killer acting out of panic, but from someone who had planned every step in advance. Someone who knew exactly how close he was getting. And the worst part, he wasn't even sure who he could trust anymore. Evidence had been tampered with. Leads had gone cold at the exact moment they seemed promising. And now, a second murder had thrown everything into chaos. If someone on the inside was pulling strings, then every move he made was being anticipated. Every conversation, every lead, every theory, none of it was safe. The weight of it all pressed down on him, exhaustion and fear mixing into a dangerous cocktail that made his hands shake as he reached for his phone. He needed to warn Lisa. Whatever she had been dragged into, it was far from over. But as he dialed her number, a sickening realization hit him. What if she had been targeted next? The phone rang once, twice, then a third time. No answer. His pulse pounded in his ears as he tried again, but there was nothing. Just an empty silence stretching on for far too long. Lisa was missing, and Monroe had the sinking feeling that whoever had taken her wasn't just trying to scare him anymore. They were making their next move. And if he didn't figure this out fast, he wouldn't just be investigating another murder, he'd be witnessing one in real time. Monroe's fingers tightened around his phone as he stared at Lisa's unanswered call, his pulse hammering in his ears. Every instinct told him something was terribly wrong, but he wasn't prepared for what came next. Just as he was about to leave his office, his phone buzzed a text message. No name, no number, just a single location pinned to the map. A dark industrial stretch of town where no one had any business being this late at night. Below the pin was a message that made his stomach turn. "Come alone." She's waiting. The drive there felt endless, his mind racing with every possibility. Was Lisa alive? Had the killer finally made a mistake, or was this another trap? Another move in the game he was only beginning to understand. He gripped his gun tighter as he pulled onto the cracked pavement of an abandoned shipping yard, his headlights slicing through the thick fog. At first, the place looked deserted. Then, just ahead, he saw her. Lisa. She was standing near one of the rusted cargo containers, perfectly still, her face pale and unreadable. Relief flooded through him as he rushed toward her until she raised a hand, stopping him in his tracks. And that's when he noticed the look in her eyes. Not fear, not relief. Something else. Something colder. "I told you to stop looking," she said quietly. The words hit him like a blow, confusion clouding his thoughts as he struggled to process what he was hearing. Before he could speak, the container door beside her creaked open, and a man stepped out of the shadows. Monroe's stomach twisted. It was the second victim, the man who had been found dead in the motel alley. Except he wasn't dead. He was standing right in front of him. It all came crashing down in an instant. The missing evidence, the manipulated forensics, the threats that seemed designed not just to scare him, but to guide him, to push him toward the wrong conclusions. The second murder had never happened. It had been staged, a carefully orchestrated misdirection to keep him chasing ghosts. And Lisa had never been a victim at all. "You were never supposed to figure it out," she said, stepping closer, her voice steady, almost apologetic. Daniel wasn't innocent. None of us were. Monroe's breath came in short, uneven bursts, as the truth settled over him like a suffocating weight. This wasn't about a random murder or a killer covering their tracks. This was about something much bigger, something that had started long before Daniel Brooks' body was ever found. And now, as he stood there, trapped between the woman he thought he could trust and a man who had already died once before. One thing became painfully clear: he wasn't the one hunting the truth. He had been led straight into it. And now they were deciding whether or not he would ever make it out alive. Monroe could hear the pounding of his own heart, a steady drumbeat of panic, as he processed what was unfolding in front of him. Lisa's face remained unreadable, her posture tense but composed, as if she had prepared for this moment long before he had ever realized he was walking into a trap. The man beside her, the one Monroe had believed was dead, watched him carefully, waiting for a reaction, for a move, for anything that would give them an excuse to finish what they had started. Every instinct told him to reach for his gun, to fight his way out, but deep down, he knew the truth. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and worst of all, out of time. "You don't understand what you've stepped into," Lisa said, her voice calm, but laced with something colder. "This isn't about justice, and it's not about right or wrong. It's about survival. And right now, you need to make a choice." She reached into her pocket and pulled out another envelope, identical to the ones before. But this time, when she held it out to him, there was something different in her expression. A test. A warning. He took it, his fingers shaking slightly as he tore it open, revealing a single sheet of paper with a name written in bold, deliberate handwriting. His name. Below it, 2 dates: his birthday and today's date. He didn't need an explanation. The message was clear. They weren't just threatening him. They had already decided his fate. "I need you to listen to me, Monroe," Lisa continued, stepping closer. "You were never supposed to get this far. And you definitely weren't supposed to find me. But here you are, and now you have a choice. Walk away, pretend you never got this close, and you live. Keep pushing, keep digging, and you already know how this ends." Monroe felt the weight of it pressing down on him, the unbearable truth of just how deep this went. It was never about solving Daniel Brooks' murder. It was about keeping a secret buried, a secret that Lisa and the others were willing to kill for. And the worst part? He still didn't know what it was. The real reason Daniel had been killed, the real reason this entire case had been manipulated from the start. He only knew one thing for certain: if he walked away now, that secret would stay hidden forever. But then, Lisa did something he hadn't expected. She hesitated. Just for a second. A flicker of something: regret, doubt, something real flashed across her face before she quickly masked it again. That hesitation told him everything. Whatever this was, whatever they were protecting, it wasn't as simple as she wanted him to believe. "You were my friend," Monroe said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside him. "Was any of that real? Or was I just another loose end to tie up?" For the first time, Lisa looked away, as if the question cut deeper than she wanted to admit. "This isn't personal," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. It never was. But Monroe knew better. He could see it now, the cracks in her resolve, the fractures in whatever version of the truth she had been telling herself to justify all of this. If she had truly wanted him dead, it would have already happened. And that meant there was still something she wasn't saying. Something she couldn't bring herself to do. That was his opening. His only chance. "Then make it personal," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Tell me the truth." Lisa didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced at the man beside her, who shifted uneasily, clearly uncomfortable with how this was playing out. Monroe saw the moment of indecision in her eyes, the war between loyalty and conscience. And then, just as she opened her mouth to speak, a sharp noise split the silence. A gunshot. Lisa flinched, her body instinctively turning toward the sound as Monroe ducked behind a nearby crate, his heart hammering. Someone else was here. Someone who wasn't willing to wait for him to make a choice. And now, everything was spiraling out of control. The air split with the echo of the gunshot, sending Monroe into survival mode. He ducked lower behind the crate, his breath ragged as his mind raced. He hadn't seen where the shot had come from, but one thing was certain: this wasn't a warning. Someone wanted to silence this conversation for good. When he risked a glance over the edge of the crate, Lisa and the man beside her were already in motion, their expressions dark with realization. "They found us," she muttered under her breath, her hand moving toward her waistband, where a gun was holstered. But it wasn't Monroe she was aiming at. Before he could process what was happening, more shots rang out, bullets splintering against metal containers, ricocheting into the night. Monroe swore under his breath. This wasn't just about him anymore. Whoever was behind this conspiracy had just made a move to wipe them all out. He pressed himself against the cold steel, forcing his mind to work through the chaos. If Lisa was reacting like this, if she wasn't the one pulling the trigger, then that meant she wasn't at the top of this. She wasn't the one calling the shots. For all the deception, all the careful manipulation, Lisa wasn't running the show. She was just another piece on the board, just like him. Monroe felt a cold realization settle in his gut. He had been thinking too small. He had believed this was about Daniel Brooks, about covering up a single murder, about tying up loose ends. But that wasn't the truth at all. Daniel's death wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the fallout from something much bigger, something that had started long before Monroe had ever been assigned this case. And now, someone was cleaning house. He needed answers, and he needed them now. He locked eyes with Lisa across the chaos, and for the first time, he saw something raw in her expression: fear. Real, unfiltered fear. Whoever was behind this, she wasn't safe either. "Run," she said, barely audible over the gunfire. But Monroe wasn't leaving. Not yet. Ducking low, he made a break for her position, weaving through the shadows as another burst of gunfire lit up the night. Lisa and the other man were already moving, heading toward an old service door on the far side of the shipping yard. Monroe didn't hesitate. He sprinted after them, his body surging with adrenaline as bullets whizzed past. They barely made it inside before the door slammed shut behind them, the heavy clang echoing through the dimly lit space. Monroe braced himself against the wall, his chest heaving as Lisa locked the door. They had only bought themselves seconds. "Who are they?" he demanded, his voice sharp, desperate for answers. Lisa wiped a streak of sweat and dirt from her face, her breath shaky. "The same people who pulled the strings on Daniel's death." It was never about solving Daniel Brooks' murder. It was about keeping a secret buried, a secret that Lisa and the others were willing to kill for. And the worst part? He still didn't know what it was. The real reason Daniel had been killed, the real reason this entire case had been manipulated from the start. He only knew one thing for certain: if he walked away now, that secret would stay hidden forever. But then, Lisa did something he hadn't expected. She hesitated. Just for a second. A flicker of something: regret, doubt. Something real flashed across her face before she quickly masked it again. That hesitation told him everything. Whatever this was, whatever they were protecting, it wasn't as simple as she wanted him to believe. "You were my friend," Monroe said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside him. Was any of that real? Or was I just another loose end to tie up? For the first time, Lisa looked away, as if the question cut deeper than she wanted to admit. "This isn't personal," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. It never was. But Monroe knew better. He could see it now, the cracks in her resolve, the fractures in whatever version of the truth she had been telling herself to justify all of this. If she had truly wanted him dead, it would have already happened. And that meant there was still something she wasn't saying. Something she couldn't bring herself to do. That was his opening. His only chance. "Then make it personal," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Tell me the truth." Lisa didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced at the man beside her, who shifted uneasily, clearly uncomfortable with how this was playing out. Monroe saw the moment of indecision in her eyes, the war between loyalty and conscience. And then, just as she opened her mouth to speak, a sharp noise split the silence. A gunshot. Lisa flinched, her body instinctively turning toward the sound as Monroe ducked behind a nearby crate, his heart hammering. Someone else was here. Someone who wasn't willing to wait for him to make a choice. And now, everything was spiraling out of control. The air split with the echo of the gunshot, sending Monroe into survival mode. He ducked lower behind the crate, his breath ragged as his mind raced. He hadn't seen where the shot had come from, but one thing was certain: this wasn't a warning. Someone wanted to silence this conversation for good. When he risked a glance over the edge of the crate, Lisa and the man beside her were already in motion, their expressions dark with realization. "They found us," she muttered under her breath, her hand moving toward her waistband, where a gun was holstered. But it wasn't Monroe she was aiming at. Before he could process what was happening, more shots rang out, bullets splintering against metal containers, ricocheting into the night. Monroe swore under his breath. This wasn't just about him anymore. Whoever was behind this conspiracy had just made a move to wipe them all out. He pressed himself against the cold steel, forcing his mind to work through the chaos. If Lisa was reacting like this, if she wasn't the one pulling the trigger, then that meant she wasn't at the top of this. She wasn't the one calling the shots. For all the deception, all the careful manipulation, Lisa wasn't running the show. She was just another piece on the board, just like him. Monroe felt a cold realization settle in his gut. He had been thinking too small. He had believed this was about Daniel Brooks, about covering up a single murder, about tying up loose ends. But that wasn't the truth at all. Daniel's death wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the fallout from something much bigger, something that had started long before Monroe had ever been assigned this case. And now, someone was cleaning house. He needed answers, and he needed them now. He locked eyes with Lisa, across the chaos, and for the first time, he saw something raw in her expression: fear. Real, unfiltered fear. Whoever was behind this, she wasn't safe either. "Run," she said, barely audible over the gunfire. But Monroe wasn't leaving. Not yet. Ducking low, he made a break for her position, weaving through the shadows as another burst of gunfire lit up the night. Lisa and the other man were already moving, heading toward an old service door on the far side of the shipping yard. Monroe didn't hesitate. He sprinted after them, his body surging with adrenaline as bullets whizzed past. They barely made it inside before the door slammed shut behind them, the heavy clang echoing through the dimly lit space. Monroe braced himself against the wall, his chest heaving as Lisa locked the door. They had only bought themselves seconds. "Who are they?" he demanded, his voice sharp, desperate for answers. Lisa wiped a streak of sweat and dirt from her face, her breath shaky. The same people who pulled the strings on Daniel's death, body jerking from the impact. Blood bloomed across her shirt as she gasped, dropping to her knees. "Lisa!" Monroe lunged forward, catching her before she hit the ground, but her breathing was already shallow, her fingers gripping his jacket like she was holding on to something that was slipping too fast. Harris exhaled, lowering his gun as if this had all been an inconvenience. "Such a waste," he muttered. He turned to his men. "Finish it." Monroe barely had time to react. He grabbed Lisa's gun, fired before he could second-guess himself. The first shot hit the man closest to him, sending him crashing back. The second grazed Harris, making him stumble just enough for Monroe to push forward, knocking him off balance. Lisa coughed, blood staining her lips. "Go," she rasped. "Don't let them." But her words were cut off as another shot rang out. Monroe didn't have time to see if she was still breathing. He ran. He crashed through the back exit, stumbling into the cold night air, his body surging with adrenaline. Tires screeched in the distance, Backup was coming. He had only minutes, maybe less. Then he remembered the paper in his pocket. Hands shaking, he unfolded it. There, scrawled in Lisa's handwriting, was an address. No explanation, no instructions, just one final clue. And as Monroe took off into the night, he knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. Not yet. The address led Monroe to a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where people checked in to disappear. The neon sign buzzed weakly overhead as he pulled into the gravel lot, his mind racing with everything that had happened. Lisa was gone. The case that had started as a routine homicide had unraveled into something much darker, something bigger than him, bigger than the badge he wore. Harris had been the face of it, but he wasn't the only one. There were others. There were always others. And now, Monroe was on his own. He killed the engine and sat in the silence for a moment, gripping the folded piece of paper in his hand. Lisa had given up everything in those last moments. She had chosen a side. Maybe, in the end, she had always been playing both. Maybe she had never been his enemy at all, just another person trying to survive in a game neither of them had signed up for. He exhaled sharply and stepped out into the cold night air, his boots crunching against the gravel as he approached room 107. The number had been written in Lisa's handwriting on the back of the note, circled twice, as if to say, "This is where it all leads." He knocked once, then twice. No answer. His hand hovered over his holster as he reached for the doorknob, expecting resistance, but it turned easily under his grip. The door swung open, revealing a dimly lit room that smelled of dust and stale cigarettes. The bed was unmade, the dresser drawers left half open like someone had packed in a hurry. And on the nightstand, next to an empty glass, sat a thick manila envelope with his name written across the front. Monroe's chest tightened as he picked it up, his fingers trembling slightly as he peeled back the flap. Inside, he found photographs, dozens of them. Surveillance shots of Harris meeting with high-ranking officials, handshakes exchanged in shadowed corners, documents passed between men whose faces Monroe recognized from City Hall, the police department, even the mayor's office. And then, at the very bottom, a single handwritten note. They were never after the evidence. They were after you. You're the only loose end now. Monroe swallowed hard, his mind spinning. This wasn't just about covering up one murder. It was about keeping a system intact, a web of corruption that stretched further than he had ever imagined. Harris had only been one piece of the puzzle. Taking him down had done nothing to stop the machine from turning. And now, they knew Monroe had seen too much. A noise outside made him freeze. A car engine idling, headlights casting long shadows through the thin motel curtains. Someone was watching. Monroe stuffed the photographs and note back into the envelope, grabbed the motel key from the nightstand, and slipped out the back door. He moved quickly, cutting through the alley behind the building, keeping to the darkness. He had learned one thing tonight: this wasn't over. It would never be over. Not until the whole system collapsed. By the time he reached his car, the other vehicle was already pulling away, its taillights disappearing into the night. They had come to check, to see if he was here, to see if he was still playing their game. Monroe started the engine and drove in the opposite direction, his grip tight on the wheel. He didn't know where he was going yet, only that he couldn't stop. He had always thought justice was about catching the bad guy, putting them away, closing the case. But now, he knew better. Justice wasn't clean. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about surviving long enough to fight another day,